Hi and welcome. This is the first lesson in the How to Find a Lawyer course. So how to find and hire the right lawyer. This is the first of 5 lessons. I'm running these live over 5 weeks, but if you're watching the replay, you can go as fast through these lessons as you like. For those attending live, you're lucky because I will take some questions at the end. For those watching the replay, you're probably watching it through the Legally Wise Women community. I am your host in there, and so you can find me and ask me any questions either directly, or if you're in the premium section, you get to ask Q&As, which I answer every fortnight. Now, this course should help you save a lot of time and money. I've had about 15 years as a lawyer, and I see that most of the problems either come because someone goes to the wrong lawyer for the wrong matter, or there is a clash between values and personality between the lawyers, or there is a conflict of interest. And a lot of lawyers in the private sector do face this. And unfortunately, it's a way that they've been trained. If they are billing by the hour and not giving you a fixed fee, then they are incentivized for the matter to go for longer. And so they won't necessarily try their hardest to resolve it for you. So in this first lesson, we're really looking at how and where to find a lawyer. Next week, we are looking at how to find the right one for you. So let's dig into the legal industry. But before I do, I just want to explain who I am. My name is Jackie Broman. Like I said, I am the CEO of Legally Wise Women and your host in that community. So I'm in there posting something almost every day. You can comment on things, you can message me directly. Like I said, premium members have access to me once a fortnight in a Q&A. I have run a firm called TBA Law for nearly a decade. We have won multiple awards. I won the Law Institute of Victoria's Regional Lawyer of the Year in 2019, been a finalist multiple times in Women in Law Awards, won the NAB Private Client Awards in 2015. So there's a few awards there stacking up. I'm also an accredited specialist. So similar to the medical practitioners in a way, you've got standard solicitors that are like GPs, and then you've got specialists. And so I did extra training. I did my master's degree, and then each law institute in each state or law society has an accreditation program. So I did my accreditation and got my specialty in wills and estates. So that includes dealing with individuals around the strategy of their asset protection, around powers of attorney and death, and then dealing with people after someone has passed away, but also business succession planning as well. I'm also a collaborative practitioner, which means that I prefer not to do litigation. I prefer to try and resolve things outside of court with alternative means. And particularly for women, I see that the court system does not necessarily bring justice a lot of the time. So getting into what we know about women dealing with the legal industry. So we know in terms of access to the legal industry that there is a big gap in who can access it. So there is no Medicare for lawyers. There is some government funding, and because of the income and asset tests on those, only about 8% of people qualify for a lawyer who is community sponsored or legal aid services. And then because there is this, well, it's a reality that legal fees can be quite expensive. There's probably only about 20% of the population who can actually afford private lawyers and therefore afford justice, which is leaving about 70% gap in the middle. which I just find unacceptable. And so being able to find the right lawyer is part of being able to solve that, because there are fixed fee lawyers that you can have certainty around your costs. And there are also free ways of resolving your problems as well. So if you know where to go, know where to start, your fees can be significantly less. There's a lot of legal information out there, but it's hard for people to find the right stuff. You don't necessarily know where to start and what to search for, because you don't know what language lawyers use. And it would be nice if there was just somewhere where you could be pointed to, you know, I've got a problem, where do I go? Well, Legally Wise Women is preparing those where to start kits. So we do provide a lot of that. There's 100 or so free videos in there on all sorts of areas of the law. And of course, the premium members have access to fortnightly Q&A with me to help steer you in the right direction, preferably to try and help you resolve something at a minimal cost to begin with. And only then would you have to find and hire the right lawyer if you can't do it yourself. But then Legally Wise Women is also helping you through that engagement process, because when you hire private lawyers, it's hard to judge whether you have a good lawyer, whether you're getting quality and effective service, because unless you've worked with a lawyer before, even on the same kind of matter, you won't necessarily know how to compare and judge whether they're doing a good job. So we definitely help support you with that, help you keep your lawyer accountable, help you to communicate and understand the process. And we also know that there are a lot of biases against women in the legal industry, and if you know some of those, you know how to work with them. So we also know that adversarial nature of the legal industry does not necessarily suit most women. So what do we do about that? Well, we try and avoid litigation as much as possible. We also know that the way women even communicate or problem solve, there are biases against that for us as well. So we have to be aware that by not communicating directly, by wanting to problem solve in groups, by wanting to ask a lot of questions, it can be perceived as indecisive or uncertain, whereas it's not. And so we need to make allowances for how we need to engage. And it might be that we can't have a single full day mediation. We might need 2 or 3 over multiple half days, because we need the time to consult. We need breaks to be able to make sure that we don't make bad decisions in emotional states. And having the right lawyer will help with all of this, because you won't be pushed into something that you're not ready for. Now, just a bit of an overview as well about what alternative dispute resolution is versus traditional practice, and what we're trying to steer away from. So we are trying to steer away from a more traditional lawyer. A more traditional lawyer is going to want to take over and try and negotiate for you and rack up a whole lot of fees doing that. And then they're going to want to take you straight into court and rack up a whole lot of fees doing that. So I'm being really cynical and really simplified and generalizing, but that's what we're steering away from. We're trying to find you alternative methods. We're trying to find you free services and ways you can do things for yourself. Then we're trying to find you solicitors that you can go to just for single advice, and then you maybe go off to a mediation by yourself. And then you come back to the lawyer for the next step and maybe go off and do a collaborative practice. You can do a whole lot of negotiation for yourself. And again, we're going to support you with that through Legally Wise Women. Court does have its place, but again, it needs to be managed well, and fixed fee, if you can get a lawyer who provides you with a fixed fee, at least you've got certainty there as well. So that's what we're headed towards. Now, a bit more about the legal industry. So I'm actually going to go back a step and explain how the justice system sits within the government in Australia and in other Commonwealth countries. or Western countries even. So the triangle here at the top is our separation of powers with our government. So we want to have fairness in democracy as much as possible, have our three powers of government separated. So Parliament in Australia has no influence over the justice system and the judiciary. So that is a true separation of power. And we're lucky in Australia because the court system sits independently from Parliament and can't be influenced by ministers. Whereas in the US, for example, the judges are appointed by the president and by the Congress, and they're essentially in some ways owned by the particular party that appoints them. So there's not a true separation of powers in the US between Parliament and judiciary. The executive is our government departments. Now, we don't have a true separation of powers in Australia between executive and Parliament. We do to a degree, but our ministers generally sit as the heads of our departments, even though those ministers come and go and our departments stay. So that then provides at least some stability and separation because they will continue to work. Whereas in the US, for example, they have a truer separation of powers because every time there is a new president, the whole executive generally gets disbanded and a whole lot of new people have to come in and recreate everything all over again, which is probably far too disruptive. Now, we do have a bit of a connection between the judiciary and the executive in Australia because the Department of Justice is an executive arm of government. However, again, the judiciary, the actual judges who sit, are not influenced by the ministers that head those departments. So in the justice system, we are then talking about where you can find a lawyer and why. So the judiciary was originally the king, and people would come and petition the king. And then people would start paying someone to petition the king for them. And then laws got more and more complex. And so the people who were being paid to petition the king had to actually go and have some education. And it became a profession over time. Now, like I said earlier, we don't have a Medicare for law. So we do have some funded programs where you can get access to justice cheap or free, but primarily the lawyers are a private business. It's a way that we provide our expertise to people who need it. Now, the sorts of government lawyers you'll get is legal aid, essentially. Now, legal aid covers a limited amount of areas. They do crime, they do child protection, and they do some family law where a child is at risk. Most of the time it is income assessed, and so you're not necessarily going to be able to access those services even if you've got a criminal matter, but if you're well paid, you're going to have to go private. So we have limited government services, and over the last 30 years, the funding has been gradually getting less and less compared to the need and population. So we know from the beginning, where I said about 8% of people qualify for this whole area, the government and the community legal centres. So community legal centres are in the not-for-profit space, so they are trying to help people without running a business, so they're not doing it for profit. They get a lot of their funding from government, they get grants, they're constantly fundraising. A lot of community legal centres have a lot of young lawyers and law students. They can often give you a bit of an initial advice across a broad range of areas, but can't represent you. And the advice that you get may not be experienced advice. So you do have to take what you can get when you're not paying. The community legal centres will represent some matters. There are, again, most of the community legal centres are looking at domestic violence issues, child protection, family separations, and some crime. They will help a little bit with debt issues and civil rights issues. There are a couple of community legal centres that are operating in the space for small business and helping people try and find some pro bono things around migration and other injury type matters. Coming quickly back to government, there are also some other government services provided that aren't lawyers, like an ombudsman. So it's a dispute resolution process. The small business commissions in each state generally also have a dispute resolution process available for a small fee for small businesses. So that is a government service to try and access. There are also consumer affairs type places run by government with a dispute resolution service. So whilst they're not lawyers, there are still free places to access that might be your first point of call. So again, we want to try and find out as much information as possible as you can for free and try and find ways of resolving your problem for free before you then come to the private law firm situation. So that's a basic overview of the industry. So let's jump a little bit deeper into government. So like I said, legal aid is primarily where you've got government lawyers. Then we've got, I'll skip over Amica for a second, ombudsmans. So these are bodies set up to make sure that people aren't taken advantage of in some way. It's the best way of describing it. So you've got, for example, your government ombudsman. So if a government service doesn't provide you the service you think you should get, you can complain to the ombudsman. There is electricity, energy and water ombudsman. There is a telecommunication ombudsman. There's a financial services ombudsman. So there's quite a few in that space. And if you can find an ombudsman that covers the industry or issue that you have, that should be your first place to go. Make a complaint, the ombudsman will try and liaise between both parties to resolve it. If they can't, then you look for the next step. Now, like I said before, consumer affairs, each state will have a version of fair trading or consumer affairs. It is another place where you can go if you have an issue with a landlord, if you've bought something that doesn't work and you can't get it repaired or replaced, if you've got a complaint against a real estate agent, or some of the other professions like liquor licensing that are regulated by consumer affairs. So it is another good place to start. And as I said, for small businesses, there are also the small business commissions in each state. There is also a small and family business ombudsman to try and help with disputes within businesses and between businesses. So there's another free service to try and access. Now, coming back to Amica. So this is where we start having technology that will work to keep fees down for you and try and resolve things for you without having to actually have a one-on-one or a lawyer involved, or to try and figure out the forms for a court yourself. So Amica is supposed to be short for amicable, and it relates, it's a piece of technology for people who are separating and they want to organise an agreement between themselves and formalise it without having to pay someone else to do it. And so this piece of technology is somewhere where you can both log in online, enter all your details. It tells you what is fair, and then you can proceed that way if you want to. There will be increasingly more online services around. Amica is one that has been developed by government. Generally, I would be cautious of online technology that is developed privately and use the Legally Wise Women community as an opportunity to have me check things out if you're thinking about using a piece of technology to help you resolve a problem. Now, the not-for-profit space. Now, I've talked generally around community legal centres. There are a lot of community legal centres based in various suburbs around Australia. You can go to them usually initially for a free piece of advice. Again, just be cautious that you might be getting that advice from a law student. They are really good for referrals, so they can help you get on the right path. So if you don't actually know or can't articulate what your problem is, they can help with that. They can represent some matters. So maybe that's your point of call, your place to start. As well as community legal centres, there are also women's legal centres. So if you don't want to go to a general community centre, try searching for your local women's legal centre. So there is generally one in each state. In Queensland, I believe there is a Northern Queensland one as well as a general Queensland one. So again, if you're more comfortable going to a women's legal centre, please go that way. Then you've also got Justice Connect, which I think is something that you should investigate. It does some representation, but its main power is that it has a whole lot of private lawyers registered with them who will do pro bono work. And so it is worth inquiring with Justice Connect to see whether you qualify for their pro bono scheme to get a referral to a private lawyer who will work for free. Then we come to the private law firm space. And I should also explain the difference between a solicitor and a barrister. So we are all lawyers, solicitors and barristers are lawyers. A solicitor are the ones that you find in firms. So solicitors generally deal direct with the public and we do the work, we do the transactional stuff. The barrister, a barrister is more of a specialist. They have to do a bar exam to become a barrister. They cannot work in a firm. So when you see firms that advertise they are solicitors and barristers, it's not because they've got a barrister working for them. It's just because they can source a barrister, and every firm can source a barrister. So barristers essentially then become subcontractors to solicitors. So solicitors use them to get specific advice to rely on, so more detailed advice. Barristers have more time to think and research and prepare for court cases. So they are, you can also think of them as specialist advocates, whereas solicitors can go to court and do advocacy work as well, as in appear for you in a court. The barristers generally do most of that. Barristers also have what is called the cab rank rule, whereas solicitors don't. So a solicitor doesn't have to take your work. A barrister, if they work in that area and are not otherwise over capacity, must take your work. So it's a cab rank. If they're at the head and someone comes to you, they must take you. But don't believe that a solicitor is compelled to have to work for you. If they don't work in the particular area or it's not suitable for the particular solicitor, they don't have to take the work. Now, generally, a little bit more about the industry. So, the rule of law is important in Australia. And we've seen in Victoria particularly that the rule of law has been rocked a little bit with the Lawyer X scandal, and justice around the Victorian Police as well. So that's one aspect of justice and the rule of law. The other is the separation of powers that I spoke about with the triangle a couple of slides ago. But the main thing about the rule of law is that the law applies equally to everyone, and so it should. But unfortunately, there are biases against women and minorities. And so that is what we are trying to help with at Legally Wise Women, so that you're more educated and you have an equal footing to everyone else. The main reason why the rule of law was developed, and it started with the Magna Carta back in the 1600s, I can't remember, was because the king himself had to be subject to the law and couldn't be above the law. So Parliament then was able to create laws, and no one was above the law. Now, sources of the law. So as I said, Parliament is a significant source for law. We know that Parliament puts through acts of legislation and regulation, and so that is a significant place where the law is developed by Parliament. Then the other arms of government, so the executive and the judiciary, need to then interpret legislation and regulation and apply it. And this is where you start having precedent developed. Precedents are what a court has decided in a particular case, and then the same decision is followed through in subsequent similar cases. The other place or source of law is international law. Now, in Australia, unlike what most people might think, we actually don't have human rights in our constitution. So human rights have been developed as a piece of international law, as an example. So international law might be something that is applied or developed by the UN, for example, and it's supposed to be like best practice. Like, this is what the world generally thinks the law should be. But it only actually becomes the law of the country if the country ratifies what the UN says. So Australia has endorsed or ratified some of the human rights laws that the UN has developed, but they're not specifically Australian law. So they're then up to the courts to apply and for someone to enforce their rights through a court system. So that's generally the rules of the game, so to speak, and how lawyers fit in, both with the rule of law and making sure that it's upheld, and how we try and apply the law, where it's developed, and how we have to look through a number of places to work out what should apply, and it's not necessarily black and white. Now, we're coming to the end of this lesson. So I've been able to explain to you how we're trying to have an alternative style solicitor approach, not a traditional lawyer. How you should utilise government services and not-for-profit services as much as possible before trying private lawyers. The difference between a solicitor and a barrister, And now I'm going to give you an overview of the next lesson, which is probably one of the most crucial lessons. So if you have to go to a private lawyer, how do you find the right one? How do you work out what your problem is so you can even find a lawyer that does the area of law that you need? How do you work out the values and motivation of the lawyer? As I was saying before, we don't want a lawyer that is in law to just increase their fees and to have their ego stroked. We don't necessarily want a lawyer who is motivated by the game of negotiation. We want someone who actually fundamentally wants to help people. And then we're also going to talk about skill level versus skill set. Now, this applies both across the areas of law that there are and also to a degree experience. So in my skill set as a lawyer, I might have, say, 10 different areas of the law in my skill set. It doesn't mean my skill level is deep in all of those areas. So I may become quickly out of my depth in an area that I say that I can help you in which case perhaps I wasn't the best choice in that at all. A lot of lawyers, because they do want to help, and if you go to a lawyer who has that set of values, at least you're on the right path. However, it also means that lawyers sometimes find it difficult to say no to a matter because they do want to help, but it might not be that they're the best person to help. And so that's why we want you to find the right lawyer to begin with and not ask the wrong lawyer who will try and help and then not be able to help. So we're going to talk deeply about those things next week. How to articulate the sort of problem you have so you can work out what area of law it is, and then how to work out and judge what sort of values you want in your lawyer. Because some people may want a very aggressive lawyer who plays the game and performs for them. But if you want to pay for that sort of stuff, you're going to be paying a lot of money. And then we're going to talk about skill as well. Just a bit of a taste for next week with skill level versus skill set, and also motivation in a way. So in terms of, for example, low skill, high will. So someone with high will is someone either who is inexperienced but really eager to help, or generally just a lawyer with a deep sense of wanting to help people if they can. However, in the particular area of law, they might be fairly low skilled. So they fall in this box here. Versus highly skilled people with a low motivation. So some lawyers towards the end of their career, for example, might be fairly low-willed in terms of not wanting to work hard for you. They might also be burnt out. And you sometimes find this a lot in the family law space, and that's why finding the right lawyer again is really important. So you might have a very highly experienced, very highly skilled family lawyer, but if they've been doing it for 20 years and they're not fulfilled, and they have to drag themselves through thick mud on their hands and knees to get themselves to work, it's not necessarily the mindset you want here. So what we're really looking for is the lawyer up here for you, subject to cost as well, which will be in a later lesson. So as our first lesson, thank you very much for sticking with me. Again, for those who are live, I'm going to stop the recording in a second. You can ask questions, but otherwise, I will see everyone in the next lesson where we're going to look at finding the right lawyer. So See you soon in the next lesson.